Oh, hey folks, welcome back to Inside the Songs. Today I am absolutely delighted to be talking to Narayan, aka Riverboy, the original composer and producer of the OST for Cult of the Lamb, the award-winning soundtrack that has got millions of streams online and is a fan favorite around the world. Narayan, how you doing?
Good, man. Yeah. I've been really good. We had a beautiful sunny day in Melbourne today, and yeah, I'm chilling. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. The sunshine is still with me in Spain here, although going into the winter now. So days are getting a bit shorter and a bit less warm, but can't complain. Cool. Right, let's dive into this. Let's talk about your work as a composer, as a producer. Let's talk about the video game. Let's talk about the recent metal collaboration and all these sorts of things. So tell me about writing music for a video game soundtrack as an art form. How do you have to approach that in a way that is perhaps different to just writing standalone music?
Yeah. So I guess the main aspect that is different is that there is a human controlling a character, running around and playing through a story, in which the music has to change and evolve to reflect that. That someone can run into a different room or different things can happen. So it's kind of like writing, as opposed to writing like from A to B, it's kind of like writing A and then a bunch of stuff in the middle and then B at the end. But as far as individual tracks go, Julian had mentioned that he wanted the tracks to be something that you would like listen to outside of the game. So I still somewhat followed a conventional form of like A, B, like a bit of like like verse, chorus, and then like maybe a verse and a bridge. Like they still follow almost like a pop song structure, but there's just different things that can happen in that format. So for example, in the bass, there's kind of a playlist of music that can play, but at any point it can turn into nighttime, and I have kind of these ambient versions of the tracks that it swaps into for night, which are kind of, I've pulled out the drums, pulled out the bass, filtered it all a little bit, and made like ambient versions of the bass tracks. So I've got to keep that in mind, and also the player can either like run into a different room, like they can run into the temple, or they can leave the base. Things like when they come back to base after like either dungeon crawling or visiting one of the other towns or something, the track can start from like a number of different points. I didn't want it to just like start from the very beginning every time. So there's like a bunch of different places that the music can play from. And there are things like, so in the bass, it's almost like a little playlist of music that can play. So there's like 25 minutes of music that can play there. But once a baby hatches, there's like a song that plays when a baby hatches. And then once a baby is hatched, that song is then thrown into the playlist as well. So it's kind of like we're expanding the music that can play in that section of the game. So there's little bits and pieces like that. And then also you've got to keep in mind. So when the player is fighting a boss, for example, they can kill the boss at any time. Like they're not going to kill the boss at the end of a bar, for example, or like maybe sometimes they will, but often not. And so I wanted but I wanted it to sound like the song was ending at that point. So I wrote a bunch of different tiny little transitions that transition the song out of anywhere, and like anywhere in the song. Basically, I have like a little 2-bar bit that can play that transitions out of the song. So yeah, and I did that for every boss track. So when you kill a boss, it quickly transitions to a quick way to end the song and then finishes it. And so it sounds like the song is actually ending and it was meant to end there, as opposed to just kind of fading out or cutting. Yeah, so there's lots of little things like that you have to think about. But at the same time, I was quite lucky in that I do come from a more of a pop, like electronic music background, where I was like making beats and writing some kind of pop song. Like I say pop very loosely. I was writing like electronic kind of experimentally pop stuff, but I was able to bring a lot of that into my writing for the game. It wasn't like they still are songs, so to speak, as you've heard. Yeah, they still kind of follow song structures, and I'm still just trying to write the best mood that I can for that area or that boss.
Yeah. So it's I guess you kind of have to have a real open-minded and flexible approach, because as you say, you're trying to write these standalone songs. And you mentioned Julian. Julian's one of the 3 guys from Massive Monster. He's saying he wants the music to be standalone so people will enjoy it outside the game. But then also you need all these kind of cue points, transition points where you can exit these songs at any point. So I guess in terms of your arrangement, you're constantly having to think about, I'd call them like ear candy, bits of things that you can use as segues in tracks to get in and out, because you're not always going to be killing the boss at the end of, the 2-minute track or whatever. So I guess you need to come at that writing process from multiple different angles.
Yeah, definitely. And that boss example is definitely the most extreme, where I kind of wrote literally transitions out from any point in the song, or made sure I had some kind of transition that would fit from any point. Other times it might just be kind of adding in a like a little kind of like when a player leaves a room, I can add in like a reverse symbol into a crash, like into a crash type thing, and you can kind of cover like the transition like that. And often that is enough, especially when you're just swapping between rooms. It doesn't need to be some elaborate like transition. But yeah, I am trying to, as much as possible, I'm trying to make it sound like, oh, the composer knew you're going to do that at that exact time. And yeah, like I knew you're going to do that, of course. And that's why it sounds like it was meant to happen. But yeah, obviously I'm still following whatever the player is choosing to do at any time.
Yeah, cool. So talk to me about how the narrative or the gameplay or your knowledge of the different characters informed the musical content that you came up with. If you come at it from like a traditional music perspective, you'd be talking about like 19th century romantic music and like programmatic music and writing music based on characters and stuff. That is still a very prevalent thing in 20th and 21st century writing. If you think about like film score writing and leitmotifs, composers like John Williams and all the greats, leitmotifs are really important in terms of evoking emotion. So how did you consider that in your writing for this game?
Yeah. So a big part of it was figuring out the sound palette for the game, and how that world actually sounds. So I wanted to make music that sounds like it exists within that universe. And honestly, so this is the first game, so I had written like a small iPhone game with Julian. We'd made like a really small game, but this is like my first console kind of desktop game, my first like sizable game that I've composed for. And so it was a lot of experimentation. And when we first started the project, I was sending the guys, like I was just sending them like beat after beat after beat, like track after track, and then I'll take that same track and they'd be like, oh, I like this about it. But what about this? And I'd kind of replace all the instruments, and then I'd send them that and be like, okay, how do you feel about this? And there was a lot of that going on until there was one track, and I think actually it was Starter Cult, which you covered, but or reimagined, I should say. But that was the first track that we felt like, oh, this really fits inside the world of the game. And yeah, I think it was this aesthetic. There were a few things that were like really obvious to me, and one of them was that there would be a lot of vocals, but a lot of vocal manipulation. I wanted to take because I feel like a vocal is like the most natural thing to us to hear, like how a human voice sounds. So I feel like you can get some like really interesting, you can really kind of play with people's emotions in different ways if you kind of take that and then do different things to it. Like you can mess with the format filter, or you can cut it up in different ways. And so I knew that I wanted to do a lot of vocal manipulation to evoke kind of like that Wicca feel and that witchcraft feel and that kind of occult feel, but also make it mess with it, mess with how people feel about it. And at the same time, like I come from an electronic scene where it was a lot about like how can you make something unique, and how can you make kind of a new sound, how can I get the most out of this? And so I was trying to kind of do things that I hadn't necessarily heard before, or just trying to stretch things in a way that I thought was unique. So that was a part of it. And then there was also this kind of cute aspect to the game, like the art style is just kind of adorable, and I wanted to capture that cuteness as well. So I used like a lot of sounds that I would say have kind of a like a short quality to them, like short sonic quality. Like a marimba is kind of dunk dunk, and all my drum sounds are quite short and like cute. I think of them as kind of cute and bubbly. And so I'm using these kind of like short sonic sounds, but then mixing them with like manipulated vocals, and that's like the basis of how I approached it.
Nice. Yeah, those short sonic sounds, they kind of remind me of like like kids like first percussion toys. They're all, as you say, short, easily contained sounds that kids can kind of learn quickly. Talk to me about a bit more about the kind of vocal manipulation and stuff, because that's really interesting to me. Obviously, when I reimagined your tracks, you sent me all of your stems, so I saw exactly how many layers of vocals and stuff you had. And in most tracks, there's anywhere between like probably 4 to 8 different vocal layers of things. So are you working from vocal samples that you're finding on Splice or Loopback or whatever, or do you record fresh vocals with somebody, and then what do you use to manipulate those? Do you put them in a sampler or do you edit them manually? So talk me through that process specifically.
Yeah. So a lot of Call to the Lamb is some different sound libraries. So Contact libraries. Contact 7 libraries. So essentially, when I first started working on the game, I knew that I wanted to use a lot of choirs and things like that. And I actually got an email a few weeks after I started working on the game that was offering a bundle sale. And so I bought 4 or 5 different vocal libraries, and they served me pretty well through the game. But there's one that I use all the time, which is it's called Addy Voices of Wind. It's Voice of Wind Addy. I think that's how you say it, ADEY. And I was using that vocal kind of making chords, and you can change the vowel that she sings with the bottom octave of the keyboard. So, I'd kind of have her singing E, O, E with different chords. Mm-hmm. And then I was chopping those up with a gate. So you probably know how you can put a gate on something and then you side chain it to another sound. And then when that sound comes in, it opens up the gate. So it's closed. There's nothing coming through. And then when you send a percussive sound to the gate, it opens up. So that's how I get all that kind of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, she's changing vowels as well. So she's kind of going, eh. Which, I was just messing around and started doing that. And I thought it just sounded really cool. And I thought it sounded quite unique. And I also kind of feel like it has this, I don't know, this overly happy, it's this kind of Disney princess kind of feel almost a little bit in the bass. I thought I really liked this kind of overly happy feeling to it, which I thought was kind of worked with the cult aesthetic of it. It's everything's so bubbly and happy, but we kind of know that under the surface that's people are getting murdered and followers are getting sacrificed and such. So I thought it kind of really worked as this how the cult is almost presenting itself, or how people feel about it most of the time, or how the followers are brainwashed. I thought it really worked. So that's one of the main vocal manipulations I did. And then with things like that, often I would put a reverb on it, bounce that out, then flip that and kind of put it up an octave and then lead into the notes or something. I'm kind of just always looking for some kind of little extra juice that I can pull out of it. So things like that. And then I use Little Altar Boy, which I'm sure you've heard of. Mm-hmm. I use Altar Boy for it has a format filter, which is a digital throat length. And so you can kind of, as someone's singing a line, you can open up that digital throat length. And so it's a lot of sounds in Hecate where it's that kind of weird, glitchy stuff.
Yeah.
So definitely mess with that a lot as well.
And formant shifting for people that aren't sure, the easiest way that I explain it is gender bending, right? So it's what you would use to take a male sounding voice and make it sound female, or vice versa, or so I will often, if I'm manipulating vocal samples, if I want to pitch something up but keep it sounding more natural, you pitch it up, but then you shift the formant down to try and keep the voice in its natural register, and vice versa. If you're pitch shifting something down, then the formant gets kind of much lower, so you shift the formant up to try and keep it sounding natural. Obviously, if you don't want it sounding natural, then you can go crazy and do loads of funky stuff.
And I think it's that sound of the format getting automated as a line, as someone sings a line. So if it's just but then the format is you're automating that format to go from -5 to +5 or whatever. It has that real you can kind of hear this weird the throat expanding or something.
Yeah, it's almost like if people are really used to the sounds of filter sweeps, either band sweeps or high pass filter sweeps or something. It's a different kind of cooler, less obvious way of achieving a similar thing. That kind of expressive movement that you can add to a sound. And if you combine that with automating it with an LFO, so that formant was being automated with an LFO with a funky wave shape, that could be a really creative way of coming up with some cool sounds. Anyway, I get distracted talking about production. So tell me about how important you think the DAW that you work in is in terms of your workflow. I know you work in Ableton, which is probably the most popular choice of DAW, especially for producers working in electronic music. What is it about Ableton you think that is supportive for your workflow? And do you think you could achieve that in other DAWs, or is it a real kind of Ableton specific thing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure with other DAWs, I'd figure out other bits and pieces that I really enjoyed. I have used Logic before. I have used Reason ages ago, and even FL Studio when it was called Fruity Loops. I had a crack version of that in high school. But I with Ableton, there's just so much about audio manipulation that it is so quick and easy that I think I would find it quite difficult to move to a different DAW. Like you can just take a sample and so quickly stretch it, and there's a bunch of different algorithms for that stretching. So you know there's some unwanted harmonics or what do they call them? Aliases, or if there's some unwanted harmonic in there, you can kind of try a different warp mode. Yeah, easily pitch shift things. It just is it feels like you almost like audio when it is Play-Doh or something. You can kind of just like, oh, try that, oh, stretch it up, oh, pitch it down, oh, do that. So I very much enjoy that aspect of it. But you know, I'm using a lot of plugins. It's not like I rely on any of the first party effects or anything that much. So yeah, I'm sure that I could probably do the same thing in a different DAW. I'm just very used to it at this point.
I think that's a really important point to pick up on, because people often ask me, you know, what is the best DAW for whatever. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter actually. Like they basically all do the same thing. Most of the same functions are in all of the DAWs. You just need to learn where they are and how to find them. So, you know, for me, I use Logic primarily because that's the DAW that I learned on first. But if I'd learned on Cubase, I'd probably still be using Cubase. Or if I'd studied music production traditionally in a university, I would have learned Pro Tools and I would be working predominantly in Pro Tools. So, you know, there's never like this is the right way to do things. But as you say, you know, you've learned your workflow in Ableton and that's why you stick with it. But you could probably do it in other DAWs.
There are some things that like I think in Logic you can turn MIDI to like notation, which you can't do in Ableton. So there's definitely a few things that I think that I'm missing a little bit. But yeah, at the end of the day, I just know it the best. I know all the shortcuts. It'd be a bit of a nightmare to relearn them.
Yeah, and that's another thing, isn't it? You know, workflow and being able to get around where you want to be and achieve what you want to do quickly. You know, once you've learned a process, it's not necessarily the best investment of time to learn something else, unless there's a good reason to transition. You mentioned you use quite a lot of third-party plugins and stuff. Can you give me a handful of them, maybe 3, 4, 5 that you couldn't live without? What do you use on almost every project?
Yeah. So on Cult of the Lamb, I use those. I use Contact quite a bit. So I use those. Voice of Wind by Addy. Yeah. So I use Contact in quite a bit of stuff. I use Serum quite a bit as like my go-to kind of synthesizer. What else do I use? I use Little Altar Boy in a lot of tracks. I use Echo Boy, which is kind of just a delay. I mean, it's pretty basic, but I just have it, so I use that. And what else am I using often? I use who was it by? I use Valhalla Reverbs. Yeah, I use those I mean, they're just set up in my default Ableton project, so I'm just using that reverb. I use the plate one actually quite a bit. Although I know the vintage verb is like that's the one that people tend to go to. But yeah, I use that, and that's like the main stuff I go to. But then when I'm kind of looking for if I'm a bit stuck on a track, I have Native Instruments Complete. I think I have Complete 13, like not the most recent, but the one before. And I'll be scrolling through, looking for new sounds, looking for something to kind of spark some inspiration, which generally is a Contact instrument. But
yeah. In fact, they've just released Complete 15, so you're 2 versions back now. But
yeah,
you know, those libraries, the Complete libraries are so vast. You know, you're never going to know everything that's in there. So you know, there's always going to be something in there new that you can like and work from if you hunt through.
I also I use Massive X quite a bit on the other Cult of the Lamb soundtrack, so I use that for some different bass sounds. Yeah, I think Massive X is quite cool as well.
Yeah, cool. Let me ask you about mixing and mastering. Is that something that you do yourself, or do you outsource that to somebody else? And talk me through how you differentiate the processes of writing, arranging, producing versus mixing, mastering. Are you disciplined in keeping those separate, or are your lines blurred?
Yeah, so I'm mixing in the project, so I'm kind of mixing as I go, and then I'll finish a song, kind of put a demo in the game. And then when it comes like closer to the end or closer to when things are actually due, I'll go back and give them a final mix. but I'm still doing it inside the project. I'm not bouncing out the stems separately. And this is like a little bit, it's a little bit lazy, but my computer can seem to handle it. I'll often do mastering on the master chain of the track, and I'm using Ozone 11. And it kind of gives you like a base, like it will analyze the track and give you like a kind of a rough picture of what it thinks you should master the track as. So it will give you like a rough start, and then I'll just go into that and tweak it a little bit and until I'm happy with it. And yeah, that's how I've been mastering so far. Yeah, it's not overly complicated. I like, it would be cool. It would be great to get someone else to mix and master every track, but there's just so much there's so much in the game.
Yeah. And talk to me about loudness of the tracks, because, for commercially released music, loudness, despite people saying, the loudness wars are over and stuff, like, they're not. People are still, trying to push their tracks as loud as they can. Is that a consideration for you producing music for a video game, or are you fortunate enough in this particular world to be able to go, you know what, I can master it up to like -11, -10 LUFS and I'm good. I don't need to try and push for like -7, -6.
Yeah, exactly. So once I put the music into the game, I'm already toning it down quite a bit anyway. I'm not competing with anybody else. People open the game and it's kind of like you're in your own little ecosystem. And so yeah, I had no pressure to compete against other tracks, other electronic tracks or anything like that. And so I aim for like kind of -10, -11. That's spot on actually, and that's barely touching the limiter. Like that's like the kicks will occasionally touch it. Yeah, which I felt very fortunate to not have to stress about that.
Yeah, because it's stressful, right? When you
It's a nightmare.
When you've got your mix sounding, great, and you're like, I really like it. It's really hitting how I want, and then you pull in your reference track, and you're like, damn it, I'm still like 2-3 dB off on the LUFS target. That's a lot when you're talking about the difference between -9 and -6. dB LUFS. That's a big difference.
What did you aim for on the reimaginings on the EP?
I think I'd initially mastered them to around -9, which to me felt really good. It still felt like it had enough dynamic range in it, enough dynamic range that I like. And then when I sent off my masters to the label, to Laced, their mastering engineer, their kind of QC guy, recommended that I make them louder to be, more in line with market standards these days, which I did, and they ended up around sort of -8, -7.5-ish. And actually, for my personal taste, for how I would want to listen to the songs, it's probably pushed a bit hard. I would have liked them a little bit more dynamic, but music these days is just slams. Like modern metal, it's almost produced like EDM, and there's so much synth stuff in there, and that it's just, you look at it as a waveform, it's just a sausage. Like it's so, but you've kind of got to work within market expectations a bit, haven't you, to a certain extent?
Yeah, it's tricky. I often feel like with instruments that you're recording, it's a lot more difficult. Like with me, for example, I'm using a lot of samples that are already like pushed so loud. And then I'm using Serum, I'm using OTT. Like a lot of I don't struggle as much to get that stuff loud, but as soon as I add like a vocal or some kind of acoustic instrument or acoustic element, yeah, I find it more difficult to get it loud without getting that instrument sounding super thin. And yeah,
it's definitely a skill set, and it's not a quick thing to learn. And mastering in itself is bloody difficult, actually. So let's talk about the new metal EP. So Cult of the Lamb, Hymns of the Unholy, which features a bunch of household names from the metal world. People like Matt Heafy, Howard Jones, Scott Lepage, a bunch of really great metal guys. What did you think of the idea when it was first mentioned to you? How did it make you feel? Tell me your feelings at that point.
Yeah. So I'm personally not a massive metalhead. So I grew up kind of near Byron Bay, like about half an hour out of Byron Bay, and we did have like we had Parkway Drive came out of there. We had like a bit of a metal scene, so I was definitely like a little bit adjacent to it in high school growing up. Like there were kids that were really heavily into metal. But yeah, as soon as I like left school, I hadn't really messed with it that much. but I do have appreciation. Like I do appreciate it a lot. I do think it's an incredible genre that I think is unlike anything else. And I feel like the game lends itself so heavily towards a metal reimagining. Like there's so many themes in the game which are very metal. It's very epic. There's like it deals a lot with like evil and occultism and just a lot of themes that I think really work with that genre. And so yeah, I was quite excited, especially when the list of collaborators started coming in, and it was just like, oh wow, this is pretty legit. This is crazy.
So let's just outline the process that you and I went through kind of before even any writing started happening from my point of view. So we had a call kind of right at the beginning of that project. And I was asking you, what do you think are the best tracks to use for this project? I guess there are, I don't know how many in the OST, like 30, more than 30 tracks?
There's over 40. I think there's 43 or 44, maybe 43, I think.
Yeah. So a lot of choice. And I was like, how do I pick? And you suggested to me, well, there are these boss battles, there are 5 kind of boss stages, and it's these tracks. And most of those were a combination of like a couple of tracks as pairs, like Elegos and Hecate, for example. And the only one I think that was more than 2 tracks together was the final boss with the one that waits and all that stuff. And that was a really kind of neat suggestion. So from that, you then went back to your Ableton sessions and you bounced out all of the stems for me individually, so that I could then kind of work through those and pick and choose what I wanted to kind of include and adapt and use in my sessions. Having heard now the full EP and had a bit of time to digest it, what does it make you feel about the use and the adaptation of your tracks? Do you still feel connected to them in this reimagining, or does it feel like a separate thing?
No, I think you've done a fantastic job of keeping elements from the original, so you can still definitely hear the tracks breathing through your reimaginings. But I also think you've completely shifted them into something new as well. They're like completely different versions of them. But I can still kind of hear certain melodies and certain chord progressions breathing through it. And I think it was a really good choice how you took the mini boss and the main boss of those different areas and combined them into one track. I think you did a really good job on that. And yeah, props to you.
Thanks. Yeah, to me, it was really important that I wanted anyone that was a fan of the OST already to be able to hear those songs kind of underneath. So for anybody that can be bothered, like structurally, they sit on top of each other identically, like the length of the phrases, the tempo, structurally they are identical. And I wanted that to be exactly the case, because that to me was a way of really making sure that some of the heart and soul of the original songs stayed integrated. I felt that if I started hacking about, structures and moving bits or taking bits out, that would just become too removed from the OST, and that would feel less connected as a project. And I wanted it at all times to remain really connected with your OST. So I'm glad that you can hear that stuff in there.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so if you put the tracks directly on top of them, they follow the same form.
Identical to the beat.
Far out, because I feel like you do go into like some different chord progressions. Sometimes you'll take liberties with different things and kind of go into some different it feels very different. That's an amazing feat.
Yeah. So harmonically, they can change sometimes. So that there might be some reharmonizing. So where perhaps I take out the harmonic elements of yours, but maybe just still keep a melodic element, but then revoicing it underneath with something else. But yeah, structurally they match like 100%, which I'm kind of glad that you don't realize that, because if you, as the guy that wrote the original tracks, hadn't picked up on that to me speaks of the merit of the metal stuff kind of in its own right. So
it definitely stands on its own. I think they're I think you've struck a really good balance where you can tell that they're from the originals, but they're very much their own thing. I think, yeah, they sound great.
Well, I'm, from my point of view, I'm super grateful for you being open-minded to the project and facilitating it so willingly with giving me all your stems and stuff. That was it just made such a difference to the whole project.
No, of course, man.
Let's talk about the industry in a slightly wider way. So let's talk about the role of soundtracks in gaming and its kind of increasing recognition and celebration in the wider world. How do you see game soundtracks evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I honestly, I think this is a very cool use case of where we've taken. I feel like the Cult of the Lamb soundtrack has gotten new life on a few occasions. So we had like a small orchestra of about like an 8-piece orchestra perform the tracks during Melbourne's Games Week. This was last year, and we also we took all the tracks and we kind of did this like live rave thing at Fed Square as well. So we kind of like we were there's a big like open space in Melbourne, and I was set up on this podium, kind of playing these tracks, and we were projecting like matching projections on this wall at the same time. And yeah, I'm very thankful for the new life that this soundtrack has been able to have. And you working on this project is also like another, yeah, just another form of that. I think it's amazing. For me, game soundtracks they've always been very important. Like even since honestly being a kid playing Donkey Kong Country, one of my like earliest influences is Donkey Kong Country. Like the some of the tracks are like aquatic ambience, and they're just these like beautiful kind of synth wavy tracks. You know, scored to a game about a monkey collecting bananas, more or less. Yeah, but I think people are more and more treating game music as its own, like, you know, an important part of the culture. And yeah, I think it's only going up.
Yeah, and it's a space that so many musicians want to get into. I mean, I know, especially in the metal scene, but you know, in the wider kind of music industry as a whole, if you talk to pretty much any musician in a band about wanting to work within, you know, the gaming industry, they'll all say, I'd love to do that. Like it's on my bucket list. So the musicians are chomping at the bit to kind of be involved in the gaming industry. And I think that comes from a couple of perspectives. One, it comes from the fact simply that, you know, a lot of people are fans of games. They play video games. Musicians that are on the road spend a lot of time in tour buses, you know, maybe plugged into their Steam Deck or, you know, their DS or whatever. And also from the perspective that like gaming industry is worth so much more than the music industry, like many times more. And it's harder and harder to earn, you know, a complete living as a musician. And it's a really attractive prospect being able to do something in another industry that, you know, they're already a fan of and potentially earn some cash from it as well. You know, is also a really attractive prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so it's bigger than the games industry is bigger than the music industry and the film industry combined, which is, yeah, just crazy. It's crazy. It's wild. But yeah, a lot of people gaming.
A lot of people gaming. It is wild. It kind of surprises me that people are still not as aware of that fact as I think they should be, because, you know, people probably still perceive film industry, Hollywood, Bollywood, you know, the music industry as these two great pin-up things.
Yeah.
Which they are.
Yeah.
But like, you know, there are many more people sat at home playing their games online with their mates, talking away, than there are going to the cinema and making movies and buying records.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel lucky to be in it. I feel like it's somewhat, because it is somewhat, I mean, it is somewhat still a new frontier. I feel like there's still uncharted territory, you know, and it's evolving so quickly, and so much is changing. Like even putting the kind of beat music that I make in a game, like I hadn't heard it done like that before. It may be done. I might have missed it, but it's yeah. I felt like, oh, this is really cool. Like I could do something in this game that might not have been done in this way before. Whereas in the music industry or in the film industry, it's so much more established and been around so much longer that it feels like kind of everything's been done a little bit. Although, you know, it always feels a little bit like that.
That's an important point, isn't it? Because the video game industry, you know, I'm very much generalizing here, but let's say it took off properly in the 80s, right? When consoles became a household thing. It's 40 years old as an industry. The film and music industries as a popular music industry are both more than 100 years old, each of them. And if you go back before that, in terms of people watching things for entertainment or listening to things for entertainment, theatres and concerts have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But the industry of buying entertainment to sit and play on your own comparatively is very new. So, as you say, that's why it's so much more of an exciting space, and, things are developing so much more rapidly.
Yeah, it's amazing to be a part of. Yeah, it truly is.
So last thing from me, do you think that there's a specific kind of skill set or mindset that composers need in order to get into writing music for video game? Is there like a route that people can take, or is it really much more of a kind of a flexible networking, making your own opportunities kind of thing? What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like every game composer that I talk to, it seems like they all got into the industry in a different way, and it's tricky because it is the most common question you get is like, all right, how do you get into that industry? And honestly, like I don't know, it seems like everyone does it a little bit differently, but I would just say try and be involved in the communities that make games. Like in your city or wherever you are, if you can go to little local game meetups, or they often like, especially especially in Australia in the main cities, and I'm sure all over the world, there are little meetups where people will show early demos of their games. And yeah, if you can just start being a face, a recognizable face, just kind of getting amongst it a little bit. I'd say just being friendly and normal, as opposed to, you don't want to kind of go up to every table and be like, hey, do you need a composer? Hey, do you need a composer? Because it's like that. Apparently with developers, like composers is the most emails asking if they need a composer out of any other role. It's quite it's quite competitive. It's quite saturated. But I think if you can just be like a nice person and just be interested in other people's work, and eventually I think that will come round. But yeah, it's tricky. Like everyone has a different route into it. Julian, the way I got into it, Julian was he liked the music of the band that I was in called Willow Beats. He was a fan of our music, and he'd followed us on Twitter, and I saw like his kind of icon pop up, and I thought it looked kind of gamey, and I just emailed him and was like, I DM'd him, and I was like, oh hey, do you make games? I love video games. And he was like, oh, I really like your music. I'd love to make something with you one day. And that was the beginning of our relationship, and that's led to where I am now. So I think also just planting little seeds just where you can. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have the best advice, but I think just get amongst it.
I think that is good advice in itself. I think there can be a lot of almost complacency with people that have, let's say you've had a really good education. You've gone to college, you've gone to university, you've studied all the right things. Traditionally, you walk out of university with your degree in whatever it might be. It might be in composition, or it could even be in video game composition. Yet there are specific degrees that you can do in very specific things. That by no means guarantees you anything. Like, you have to go and find and make your own opportunities, because there are so many people in the world trying to do the same thing as you, that if you're not hustling and looking for opportunities, you won't get opportunities. It's simple as that. Someone else will be hustling more than you. But as you say, you don't want to do that in a way that is pissing people off. You want to be the nice guy that people are like, yeah, I spoke to him and I feel like I could work with him. You don't want to be like, he's great, but he's also a dickhead. Like, because no one wants to work with you.
I think networking is just making friends. Like at the end of the day, like you can't go in thinking like, all right, I'm going to network, because it just comes across so phony and so annoying. You can really tell when someone like really wants something out of you, or is trying to get something out of you, or so I honestly, just think being that cool, that nice guy. And yeah, like I was saying before, like you don't have to specifically say, hey, do you need a composer, for people to find out that you make music. Like if you go up to a table of someone that's showcasing a game and you're asking them a bunch of questions, like eventually they'll probably say like, oh, so what do you do? And then you can be like, oh, I'm a game or I'm looking to get into game composing. I just think it's a little, I think that's a big one. That's what I kind of realized as well when I was first going to game meetups. I was like that guy going around being like, hey, do you need a composer? Hey, do you need a composer? And it just never landed. So
well, it's the de facto, isn't it? When you're desperate to get into a space, you try and put yourself in that space. But there's a great little analogy that I use when talking to people about songwriting, particularly writing lyrics. And often when people are trying to convey a certain message, they want their listener to feel a certain way. They'll tell the listener how to feel in a really obvious way in the song. and that will never connect. The way that you get people where you want them to be is by showing them descriptively where you want them to be, and then they will connect the dots. You know, in this context, we're talking about networking. You go and you show your interest and you show your knowledge and you show your ability without saying, hey, I'm a composer and I want to work with you. You know, nobody likes to be sold to. Like, you know, you get a cold call on the phone. You're not like, oh, great, a cold call. Let's have a chat. Nobody likes that. So you have to think about it from the perspective of the person that you're trying to connect with. You know, how would you want to be approached? How would you want to make a new connection that may in the future be fruitful?
Very true. Very true.
Dude, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for finding the time to chat to me. And I can't wait to see the next installment of the video game.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. It was fun to chat, and amazing work on the EP. You absolutely killed it. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. It's been a pleasure.